This week in the Bible, we talked about the fall in Genesis chapter 3. We talked a little bit about the serpent in the garden, but we really didn't get into too much detail on that, so that's what I'd like to focus on today. So, what's the deal with this serpent? Clearly, he was no ordinary snake. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast that the Lord had made. There are a few odd things about the serpent. Now, normally we think of it as the devil, of course, as Satan, but the text doesn't say that anywhere explicitly, and it doesn't seem to allude to it. For a lot of this, I referenced Dr. Michael Heiser in his work on this subject. I don't agree with him on everything, but he does have some really good insights that are helpful. There are a few things to notice that clue us into the fact that this isn't, just an ordinary snake. For one thing, it spoke, and no one seemed to be surprised by that. It could be the case that people could talk to animals back in the day, a bit like Narnia, I suppose, where animals had a different relationship with people and then eventually lost that ability. Also, it doesn't seem to have crawled on its belly to begin with, since that was part of its curse. Now, Genesis chapter 3 isn't meant to teach us about zoology, right? In the same way that Genesis chapter 1 doesn't teach us about astronomy, right? There are certain things going on here that we can't, again, dissect and understand with sort of a scientific, sort of rationalistic lens. It's not intended to be that way. And that's really for the best. Science and the way that we think about those things changes, right? The science that we had 100 years ago is laughable to us today, and I'm sure that in 100 years, the things that we take for granted scientifically will be just as ridiculous. You might think of even like the whole transgender craze. We're going to be embarrassed and ashamed of ourselves looking back on that sort of stuff. Regardless, everything is infused with not just sort of a material sense, but there's a spiritual sense to it. And so the serpent there's a certain spiritual significance to it, a certain symbolic representation that is going on here. Not to say that this is symbolic or metaphorical, and purely or anything like that, but the physical world carries with it metaphysical realities, where it says that the serpent was crafty, more crafty than the other beasts of the field. Even now, we sort of understand this in that certain animals represent certain things, right? An ox is strength, right? It has sort of some symbolic reference to strength, kind of across cultures. An owl is wise. Eagles fly high. We think of snakes as being crafty and cunning, a bit like foxes, but there's maybe some nuance there. Or even like a falcon, right, has keen eyes. I think I pointed this out before. Maybe it was just in Bible class. You wonder why Horus, for example, has the head of a falcon. And you have the eye of Horus. Well, it's obviously because Horus represents wisdom, eyesight. He sees all things. And so how do you represent a god that sees everything with keen insight, not just natural eyesight, but even spiritual insight? Well, you use a falcon to represent that. You can kind of see a similar thing going on with this snake here as well, but there's more to it than that. One fascinating text that helps us understand who this serpent is comes from the Revelation of St. John in chapter 9. I'll begin a little before in verse 7. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And skipping ahead to verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to a male child. Now, notice from the onset there in verse 9, he is called the great dragon, that ancient serpent, right? So, great dragon and ancient serpent refer to the same entity. And so, when we think of a serpent, we think of like a snake. But here, what John has in mind is more of a dragon. You might think of like one of those long serpentine type dragons you see in, particularly in like maybe Chinese art. What do they call those? Like a wyvern or something like that. This is more the anglicized variation of that. And then it says, who is called the devil and Satan? Who is called, right? So devil and Satan aren't really his proper names, right? We oftentimes use the word devil and Satan as if it's, that great dragon, that ancient serpent's name. But it's not really. Those are titles. Those are what he is called. Devil means like liar or deceiver, something more like that. And Satan is a Hebrew word for the accuser, right? So this is what he does. He deceives and he accuses. He deceived Eve into eating that fruit, and then her husband with her, and the downfall of the whole world. He deceived the whole world, it says. And Satan, he accuses us before God, right? He points out our sins and says to God on his throne, look how wicked your servant Job is, or whoever. And, you should really just destroy these people. Look how bad they are. He always accuses us. But then Christ intercedes for us before the accuser. Skipping down there to verse 13, the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth and pursued the woman. Right, so there's this question about, when did this war in heaven arise? When did all this happen? When was he thrown down? And it seems to allow for the interpretation in this text that after he is thrown down, he finds himself then in the garden, and that is when he deceives. And so this deception comes after the war in heaven. And again, time from the heavenly perspective and the earthly perspective could be quite different. And so from an angelic heavenly perspective, it may have been, thousands of years or whatever, when it had only been a day for on earth in the creation. We don't know. That's all kind of maybe speculation. But anyways, the deception happens after the fall of man happens after the fall of Satan, right? And it says here that he pursued the woman who had given birth to a child, right? So he finds himself in this garden and pursues the woman who hadn't at this point, of course, given birth to a child, to a male child, but she would. And I think his goal was to destroy that male child, to corrupt her offspring. And even as God cursed the serpent after the fall, that he would set enmity between the serpent's offspring, the dragon's offspring, and the woman's offspring, singular. And we know that ultimately this offspring of woman is Christ, right? And so even from the beginning, the devil seeks to devour the Christ, seeks to kill him, as Pharaoh killed the little boys, as Herod killed the tiny little babies. So also Satan seeks to abort and kill the unborn. especially the Christ. And so we see that Mary also is envisioned here as sort of the new Eve. She gives birth to this male child who would crush the serpent's head. And so his mission is to kill that child before he kills him, to undermine God's plan of salvation, to defeat the incarnation. But yeah, it's very fascinating. There's a whole lot more that could be said on that subject, but we'll try to stay on topic. Another great passage that will hopefully help us think about that great dragon, that ancient serpent, and help us maybe understand how to imagine him is from Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1. This is a very interesting one. In that day, the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. So here there are a few things. He speaks of Leviathan, right? That's a certain creature, whether natural or supernatural. I don't know, that has arisen a lot of interest about. But he talks about slaying and punishing this Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. He calls him the dragon, even in the sea. And so this image of Leviathan, in Job, Leviathan is described as this long, twisting, kind of scaled sea serpent. And again, as we talked about in the creation account, the sea, the waters below, in a sense, mirror the waters above, right? Water, in the sort of the primordial sense, represents the sort of unsearchable depth, the vast expanses, right? The heavens are the waters above, and that they are unsearchable. They are vast. They are dark and secret. So are the ocean depths. It is dark and secret and vast. And so the waters below sort of mirror the waters above. I'm not suggesting that Leviathan is like literally the devil, or that ancient serpent. It's not these characters are the same, but Leviathan does give us, I think, a way of understanding him, in that it's a sort of a twisting thing. That's what Leviathan means in Hebrew, is like a twisting one, right? Like a coiled snake. Even in later on tradition, Leviathan is thought of as a demon, right? One of the arch demons with Beelzebul and various creatures. Nevertheless, this dragon, this Leviathan, is slain. He calls him also the fleeing serpent. In Job 26, verse 13, it says, "By the wind of the heavens were made fair, by his hand piercing the fleeing serpent." I think it may be possible that Isaiah borrowed this idea of the fleeing serpent from Job, who famously describes Leviathan in another place. But he may be kind of, it seems like that ancient serpent, the great dragon, is in mind here, since he was cast out of heaven. He flees from God. He was beaten by Michael. And so this ancient serpent is defeated, and he runs away like a fleeing serpent. And the Lord punishes him. He strikes him with his hard, great, and strong sword, and punishes Leviathan, that fleeing serpent. And so, when you think of a dragon, you think of something that is winged, right? That flies in the sky, in the seas above, if you will, in the heavens above. Leviathan is sort of similar to that, in that it is not winged, but flies in the waters, in the ocean depths, below. And so Leviathan sort of makes a, whatever you think that is, whether it's some kind of ancient dinosaur or, a dragon or some other kind of mythological creature, that one lives in the ocean depths. And I think it does kind of provide a lower image of um, the higher image of the great serpent. Finally, I would like to talk a little bit about the word for snake itself. In Hebrew, the word is nachash. Now, this is just sort of the typical word for a snake or a serpent, and even just the general zoological sense. But it's interesting. It has an interesting semantic range. It has interesting cognates and sort of images associated with even the word nakash for serpent itself. In particular, when you look at Numbers 21 and the fiery serpents and the bronze serpent that provided the cure for that death that they brought. Fiery serpents, the word fiery is in Hebrew seraph, or where we get the word seraphim for the sort of angelic being. They are the burning ones. That's what their name means, because they sort of burn with this holy, radiating light. They're seraphim, and these snakes, these serpents, are called the nachashim, snakes, seraphim. Right? They're called the burning snakes, or the fiery snakes. Now, it's probably the case that the word burning used here to describe these serpents is not that they were literally like flaming snakes crawling through the sand, um, or even sometimes as they're depicted as kind of like flying, burning snakes, some sort of little, miniature seraphim angels going around killing people. It's not really that. The burning here probably refers to more their venomous nature, and that you would be bitten by them, and you would sort of burn, have burning, biting, poison, venomous sensation, and then you would die. However, the parallel is not accidental, right? We do understand very much that these fiery serpents were sent as sort of representative of that ancient serpent, as that deceiver, as that fallen angel, the devil who rebelled against God and seeks to kill his elect. And what's more than that, though, God provides a solution by telling Moses to make a bronze serpent. Now, why a bronze serpent, we ask? Well, one is that, it looked like what was killing them, right? It was another serpent, and it was bronze. It's believed also quite commonly that these serpents, these fiery serpents, were bronzish in their color. And so the color matched. But more than that, the word bronze itself in Hebrew is related to the word for snake. It's nakosheth. Nakosheth. So the nakash is in there, nakosh, which is the same word as for a snake. And so when you look at it in Hebrew, you kind of read the like, it almost looks like snakes, right? The snaky snakes. Make a really snaky snake, make an extra snaky snake. This bronze serpent. And there may be some practical reasons how the word for bronze or copper comes from the same root as a serpent, right? There's some good speculation that could be had there that might give a reasonable explanation, or at least I don't know, some kind of logical one. But I think that's kind of missing the point. Right, in John 3, the apostle makes this connection in saying that as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so Christ also was lifted up, right? And so we understand Christ as being this snaky snake, this bronze snake who was lifted up to heal us, to cure us the the burning fires of hell and of that ancient serpent. Right? He who knew no sin became sin for us. He became sin. He became um, the the one to which all who have suffered that poison of sin leading to death would look upon him, and he would take that upon himself. He became a reproach, uh, forsaken by God in order to heal us, and it was restored then to glory and resurrected, um, imperishable. And so we find our healing in him, like we heard earlier with Leviathan, how that Leviathan is killed. um, Christ has the victory over the fleeing snake. Um, he vanquishes that Leviathan and subdues him. Uh, Also, then with the word Nakash, there's another interesting sort of um, play on this word. So in the intensive form, and when you get too much into Hebrew grammar, I'm not an expert in it myself, but in the intensive form, uh, uh, Nechesh uh, means divination, sorcery, enchantment, and omen. And so the word for snake itself is also used to refer to sorcery and magic and divination and sort of these secret arts that God forbids. Um, and so this may have to do with the fact that the snake is cunning, right? Um, it's you might think of the snake in the Jungle Book, right? Where whatever his name was, where he has his eyes get all twisty and hypnotic, and he stares you in the eyes, he hypnotizes you. So that there's snake charming and all these other practices that have um, gone on for a long time. Um, Nevertheless, this is part of the reason that that great ancient serpent is known as the devil, right? The deceiver of the world, as it says in Revelation. Um, and yet, as a great of a dragon as he may be, as untamable as Leviathan as he may be, Christ has won the victory. He has um, undone that ancient dragon and slain him with his strong, sharp, two-edged sword. Well, I think that should about cover it for the serpent. I hope I answered all of your questions. I probably just rose more. It's a very deep issue with a lot of complexity behind it. I think we have sort of this cartoonish way of thinking about the fall and about the serpent in the garden. We have all those sort of Sunday school pictures with this snake up in a tree and all those things. And that's all, good and well. But there's a lot more going on here. There's a lot more. The ancients, the early church, the uh, people of the Old Testament, Moses, probably thought about these things in much different terms than we do today. And I think that's important to consider. However, we might sort of imagine the serpent and the garden and all these things in our minds, I think the underlying sort of point for us is to see that, yes, this is the an ancient serpent, uh, who's much more than a serpent, but sort of the deceiver of the world. That he's this great red dragon who comes to kill the children, the male child especially of Eve, the child of Mary, and he did kill this child of Mary, yet he rose again. Jesus drove his sword through the head of that Leviathan. The meaning of it is that though we have fallen so far, our fall has been redeemed by our God coming down to us to save us from that which is killing us by dying and rising for us. And so we'll hope to see you Sunday and in the next video. God bless.